Hi, MS Translators. Brett here, just reporting back from day 3 of MS Virtual 2020, the online conference that is the joint meeting between ACTRIMS and ECTRIMS. So it is almost about 6 a.m. Here in Melbourne, and we've just finished the third night shift in a row. So apologies if I'm looking a little tired. But I have to say, having gone through the 3 nights now, it's definitely been worth staying up for, because again, tonight we heard a lot of really interesting presentations, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of the highlights with you. As always, if you do have any questions or comments that you want to make on the video, please just post them underneath, and I'll make sure that I reply to all of them as they come through. So the first session that I attended tonight on day 3 was again talking about strategies for remyelination. So I talked about this in our day 2 video, but again, it's obviously a huge topic in the MS research world at the moment, so we had another session on it this morning. And there's probably 2 main points that I want to make coming out of this session. So the first one was one that was also touched upon in yesterday's session, and that's around aging and the problem that aging really seems to impact on the ability to effectively remyelinate. Now, there's been some really interesting studies done on this, and probably one of the ones we've talked a lot about on MStranslate is a University of Cambridge study where they believe that one of the most effective ways to reverse the aging process, especially in the cells involved in remyelination, is through intermittent fasting. And we've posted the article summary that we wrote on their research that looked at how intermittent fasting and a diabetes drug called metformin can promote remyelination. The thought behind that is that that is reversing the aging process in these cells. One of the other pieces of information that they provided around this, and this was done by Dr. Summons from the Technical University of Munich, was looking at some data where they showed that type of immune cells come along and are important for clearing myelin debris. So these phagocytes, as the name of the immune cell, once there are damaged myelin, there's obviously a whole heap of what we could think of as rubble after you demolish a house, similar sort of thing. Once the myelin gets attacked and we have all of this damaged myelin floating around, something needs to come and clear that. Now, early on in the disease process, or in young mice where they've done a lot of these studies, what they see is that these phagocytes can come in, clear that myelin debris, but then they leave again. And what they've found is that it's really important that the phagocytes leave the site after they're done clearing that debris for effective remyelination to take place. And what they've seen in older mice is that phagocytes still come to clear that myelin debris, but they don't leave the site afterwards. And they think that this is part of the problem why in this aging process we don't see effective remyelination. There was another presentation from Dr. Miron from the University of Edinburgh, and I won't go into the details of this at the moment, but what really struck me about the research that she was discussing is just how much depth and detail we're now getting in terms of the processes behind remyelination and the pathways that are involved. And she presented some really interesting information showing 2 separate pathways that appear to be involved in remyelination. And the fact that they're understanding these pathways now means that they will be able to, in future, target those pathways and try and control them in a way that leads to myelin repair and hopefully therapeutics for myelin repair for people living with multiple sclerosis. So I did put up a tweet on the MStranslate Twitter account, and if you don't follow that, it's always a good place to follow, because that's one of the main places where I put up things while I'm watching the presentations live. I said one of the major takeaways from MS Virtual 2020, 1, there's a lot of fantastic ongoing research into myelin repair in multiple sclerosis. And 2, our understanding of remyelination is improving all the time. Thank you to all of the amazing people dedicated to this important area of research. And so that was a really big thing for me. Is just having seen now 2 days worth of presentations on the topic. I think we can all take hope from the fact that there are lots of people doing fantastic research in this area, and also that our understanding really is improving from year to year. And the sorts of presentations that were made at MS Virtual 2020 can already see advancement from what we heard in Stockholm in 2019. So I think that's fantastic. Beyond that, so after the remyelination session, there was a series of talks on a few different topics. One of the talks that I thought was really interesting was on cognition. So in the talk, they mentioned that cognitive impairment was a symptom that was experienced by about 40 to 70% of people living with MS, often irrespective of physical problems that may be experienced. So someone who may not have any sort of mobility issues, for example, can still experience quite problematic cognitive impairment. And they mentioned that these cognitive problems can have quite serious impacts on behavior and also on quality of life. And so what this researcher was looking into was to effectively treat cognition, or try and help with rehabilitation around cognitive problems. They think that it's important that they can personalize that approach. And so what they did was looking to see whether or not there were different types of cognition, of cognitive dysfunction that people with MS experienced. And what they found was that there were essentially 5 different groups, what they called cognitive phenotypes. So 5 different groups where they could find that people were in based on the sort of cognitive dysfunction or cognitive impairment that they experienced. They found that cognitive impairment occurs at the earliest stages of disease, and they also found that the most severe phenotypes occurred in people living with progressive MS. So it's hoped that having this sort of understanding may lead to more personalized management approaches for cognitive dysfunction in people living with MS. And again, I think based off some of the stuff that I talked about last night, where I was talking about fatigue and the fact that there's now more of a focus on treating symptoms, especially those that have a really big impact on quality of life, this again fits into that basket, and it's fantastic to see that there is work being done on that. Another talk that was in this session that I found really interesting was from a PhD student from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, and this was looking at the role of infections during early life and how they may alter the risk of developing MS. So what they did was that they looked at infections experienced in childhood, and they classified that as between 0 and 10 years of age, and also infections in adolescence, so between 11 and 20 years of age, and then looked in those groups to see what correlation there was with the risk of developing multiple sclerosis after age 20. And what they found was, interestingly, that infections during childhood had no effect essentially on multiple sclerosis risk. So the infections between 0 and 10 years of age didn't seem to impact on the likelihood of developing MS later in life or after 20 years of age. However, infection during adolescence did increase the risk of developing MS. And this was across all of the infections that they looked at. So when all infections together, they found that led to a 33% increase in risk. Bacterial infections, there was a 28% increased risk associated with that. Viruses was 38%. And interestingly, when they just looked at infections of the central nervous system, they found that there was an increased risk of 180% if you'd experienced a central nervous system infection during that period of time between the ages of 11 and 20. So what they were saying out of this is that it appears that this period of adolescence between the ages of 11 and 20 represent a really critical time period for the increasing of MS, increasing risk of developing MS later in life. And this lines up with some other things that we know in terms of area living in the world and things like that. So I thought that was a really interesting talk. There's one last one that I want to focus on, and this one will be getting a bit more attention, and we will do more details on this moving forward. But some really positive news for people living with progressive MS. So Patrick Vermeersch presented some trial data on masitinib. So masitinib is a new oral therapy that's been in clinical trials, and so they did a clinical trial looking at people with primary progressive MS and also non-active secondary progressive MS. And what they found was that this treatment did have benefits for people living with progressive MS compared to placebo when they looked at change in disability over time. So they found that people who took masitinib had a slower disease progression than those on placebo. In the question and answer session, after he presented that trial data, he was asked about what are the next steps. And so they will be doing a larger confirmation study in the near future. And so that this will look at having around 700 patients, again, people living with progressive MS, and they'll be looking at a few different outcomes in this. So while there's still work to be done in the area, I think it's always exciting when we start to see some potentially novel treatments that may be effective for people living with progressive MS, because as you know, we've talked about on MStranslate before, and I know many members of our community have mentioned before that it is really an area of unmet need, and they want to be seeing more done in this area. So exciting. We'll certainly present a more detailed summary on that moving forward. So that's the end of day 3 of the conference. In just under 2 weeks, we will have another session, and I'll provide another update on that. That's going to be for some late breaking news, as well as a special session talking about how COVID-19 impacts on people living with multiple sclerosis based on some data that they will have by then. We also have some potentially exciting news coming out of the conference that I will look forward to sharing with you soon. Hopefully we'll be having a number of guests come on to MStranslate to talk about their research. We're just trying to finalize all of those details now, but certainly across a number of topics that we know you're particularly interested in. So it's been a very busy 3 days. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about all of this research. As I said, please do comment below with any questions or feedback that you have on this. It's been a pleasure to bring it to you. I'm going to try and catch up on some sleep and get myself back into day shift mode, having been on night shift mode for the last 3 nights. But I look forward to talking to you again soon. And yeah, a really fantastic few days, lots of exciting research going on. I think it's all something that we can be excited about. Thanks, everyone.